still putting up with the various restrictions we're all working under. It's 2 o'clock. I'll commence this meeting of the Development Control Committee in virtual session. For the benefit of the members of the public watching or participating in this meeting, I'd like to explain who everybody is. My name is Councillor Paul Miller and I'm the chairman of this committee. This committee meeting is being held virtually in accordance with the Council's rules for virtual meetings, which reflect the recently published government regulations implementing the Coronavirus Act. The meeting is being streamed live on YouTube and I'll be available to view, which will be able to be viewed after the meeting is finished. Councillors who sit on this committee and who will be making the decisions on the applications before us are identified by name on the screen. Ward councillors addressing the committee will be introduced by name. Can I ask the officers who will be advising the committee to introduce themselves and their role?
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Townsend and I'm the Planning and Development Manager.
Anne Greaves, the Legal Services Manager.
I'm Patricia Logie. I'm the one of the Principal Planning Officers presenting applications.
Bernadette Rennick, Democratic Services Officer.
Lady? I'll carry on. The Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee and not a political meeting. The committee will be assessing the material brought before us and listening to the representations made, and will make decisions based on planning reasons. In reaching these decisions, we're guided by national and local planning policy and guidance. I understand that planning decisions can be emotive and ask that everybody remains polite and professional and patient throughout this meeting in case of any slight delay in presentations. Can I now remind both members and officers of some of the procedures that we'll be using as this meeting is virtual? Unless speaking, officers will have their videos switched off to prevent clarity as to who the committee members are for those watching and participating. At this point, can I ask all officers present to switch off their video? The officers present will also only switch their video link on during the item that they are presenting or when they wish to be invited to speak by me as chair. For this virtual meeting, councillors should observe the normal rules of behaviour under the Member Code of Conduct and ensure they are not disturbed during the meeting. Can members ensure their mobile phones are switched off or on silent? On that point, I will just mention that you might hear mine going off because deliberately it's on an alert, because I'm, in addition to keeping the timing, we now, with the principal officers and myself, we are able to communicate via WhatsApp. It's to avoid the chat messages on Zoom. So I will get an alert if I get a call from one of the officers or the legal team, in case they need to contact me offline. Can members of the committee will turn on their video link during the meeting and keep their microphones muted unless they have been invited to speak by myself as the chair. Members are reminded that if they switch off their video link or move away from the camera, they will be treated as leaving the meeting and will not be able to take part in any vote on the item under discussion. Members can indicate their wish to speak by raising their hand and should only speak when I as chair invite them to do so. When we move into debate of the application, may I ask all committee members to avoid repetition and keep any comments on each agenda item to a maximum of 4 minutes.
Alert, alert. You have a message from the dark side.
As chair, I will confirm the name of any visiting speaker at the appropriate time in the agenda before they address the committee by audio link. I will also, as I think most members realize now, when I get indications that you wish to speak, I will note them down here. I will also confirm the list as we go through, and then I will ask at the end if I missed anybody who had raised their hand, or maybe the hand hadn't been caught by the camera. Councillors should declare that they are leaving the meeting and switch off their video link if they have an interest that they need to declare or if they have predetermined an item on the agenda. They can then switch on their video link again when I call the next agenda item. When a member of the committee that has had a predetermination position on an application and is registered to speak under the public speaking scheme, they will stand down from the meeting, will only be able to participate as a visiting councillor by audio link. They will then rejoin the meeting as a member of the committee once that application has been determined. At the appropriate time, I will invite speakers to contribute to the meeting by audio link in the order set out in the update paper, but I reserve the right to reorder the speaking in the event that technical difficulties occur. I will ask each speaker to confirm their name and interest in the item before commencing the contribution. I would ask that points made by visiting speakers are material planning considerations relating to fact. May I ask all speakers, including visiting members, to speak clearly and to keep points made on the application to material reasons only. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning is finished. All speakers will be reminded of their permitted speaking time and will be advised when they have 1 minute remaining. Voting will take place by roll call, and I will confirm the recommendation that is to be voted upon before the voting begins. When each member unmutes their microphone to vote, can they leave a small pause before speaking to allow their vote to be heard? And can each member then indicate whether they are for or against the recommendation, as stated by me, or whether they wish to abstain? Hopefully, we will not have any IT problems, but I can remind councillors that if their connection is lost, then they should immediately advise the Democratic Services Officer and use their meeting link to access the meeting again. Right, and we're going to start the agenda. Agenda item number 1 is apologies for absence and substitutions. I will mention that I've been notified of 1 substitution. Councillor Jane Frankham is substituting for Councillor Cooper this afternoon. Do I have any other changes to that? No? Right, I have something else to mention. Councillor David George has, for very personal reasons, asked to step down from being the vice chair of this committee. And as that is the case, I would like a nomination for a vice chairman, and I see a nomination from Councillor Robinson. Councillor Robinson?
Thank you, Chair. I nominate Councillor Ann Court for the position.
Thank you for that. Are there any other nominations? Is the committee agreed that Councillor Ann Court will become the vice chair of this committee for the rest of this council year? If that is acceptable, I see hands going up. I'm taking that as an acceptance by the committee, unless anyone has anything else to say. No, thank you very much. Anne, welcome. Right, we move on. Declarations of interest. Do I have any declarations of interest? Councillor Robinson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Item 2 on the agenda, a non-pecuniary interest that I own adjacent land, which the applicant has to pass over to access his property. So I think it was best that I take no part in that agenda item.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. In that case, when we get to that item, would you remain on mute and also turn off your video at that particular time? Thank you very much. No other declarations of interest? Thank you. No urgent matters. Minutes of the, go on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of May and the 27th of May. First of all, we'll take the 20th of May. The chair, I will move the minutes of that meeting unless to be signed as a correct record. They have been published on the website. Are there any comments on the minutes of the 20th of May? There are none. I will sign those ultimately. The minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of May will be approved at the next Development Control Committee on the 1st of July. We move on to applications. And if I could ask, moving to the update paper, Mr. Cobbold, I'm expecting as a speaker.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear Mr. Cobbold. Thank you very much. If you'd just like to hang fire, we'll get the officer to introduce the application.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. This is item number 1 on the agenda. This is an outline application for the erection of a single dwelling with only access for consideration at this stage. Matters relating to the appearance, layout, scale and landscaping will be dealt with at a reserved matters stage. Members will note in the committee report that the tree officer has raised concerns regarding the impact of the development, in particular its position within the site in relation to the trees. He has no objection to the access. As stated already, the access is only for consideration at this stage. Condition 1 and informative number 4 make it clear that the removal of trees are not being approved as part of this outline application. Condition 12 also requires an arboreal cultural impact assessment and an arboreal cultural method statement to be submitted. The site is outside the settlement policy boundary, but it's not considered to be isolated in terms of the surrounding built form, but is considered to be marginally isolated in terms of access to services. The site is within the conservation area, and whilst normally we would prefer full applications, this is not a requirement, and outline applications are permissible in conservation areas, providing we have adequate information to assess the application, which in this case, officers believe that is the case. And the officer's recommendation is for approval.
Thank you, Sue. Mr. Cobbold, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm the planning consultant and speaking in favour of the application. It's been an application long in the system, so I'm grateful for the proactivity of the case officers resulting in this committee report. I won't repeat the findings of the report, so I'll just focus on addressing the objections which are detailed there, registered by the consultees and third parties. Firstly, on the planning history, just to clarify, the third parties noted that an application similar to this was previously withdrawn. They say that nothing has changed, but that overlooks the fact that the application previously was withdrawn to address the use of the land, which was addressed through a certificate of lawfulness. This was, in our opinion, albeit it hasn't panned out like that, it was fundamental to the consideration of the application, as the definition of previously developed land was partly hinging on it. The fact that the officer's approach now to justifying the approval of the application is based on 5-year land supply doesn't mean that the certificate of lawfulness wasn't with its uses. Moving on, in terms of the site itself, it's well contained. The proposed density of development is low, deliberately so just one dwelling. And there's no reason why a dwelling shouldn't fit comfortably on the site and enhance the character of the area. The parish council's questioned whether it should be a full application, but as you've just heard from your officers, no legal requirement for this. The test is whether you've got enough information on which to pass judgment on the application. So the proposed access is for consideration, and whilst there's an existing low-key access to the site currently, the use of this access is somewhat irrelevant given that we're looking at the use of the land as part of this application, and there will be a fully designed domestic access in its place. Hampshire County Council happy with the access for a single dwelling off the current road and are not worried about any highway safety issues. There's been a question of housing need in the village. I find this somewhat concerning, I must admit. There is obviously, as you know, a massive need for housing in Basingstoke and Deane, in Hampshire, nationally for that matter. And the government realises that limited development in small settlements is vital to the future of those settlements and their viability moving forward. If rural areas were totally exempt from development, then obviously they'd stagnate and services would become fewer and further between. Question of trees you've just heard raised by the parish council and the tree officer and addressed by the case officer, that this will be something which is addressed in the reserved matters application. The council will get to consider the impact on trees, and I have absolutely no doubt there's sufficient space on the site to ensure against the need to remove any significant trees. The site layout in front of you or in your paper is indicative, but ultimately it's a large site and the outline consent will only be for a single dwelling, leaving ample scope to find an acceptable design, layout, size, location, etc., and to ensure against any harm. Third parties have said there's limited information to make it difficult to assess the proposal, but then they reserve the right to comment when a detailed proposal is submitted. Well, that's the point of the reserved matters application. It comes in with all the information for you.
You have 1 minute.
Thank you. All third parties will be able to comment and offer their opinion on the reserved matters application in due course. So to conclude, a single new dwelling, it won't change the character of the village, it won't change the character of the conservation area. It will fit comfortably into its plot and become part of the evolution of the village over time. This outline consent should be granted to provide the opportunity to show through the reserved matters application that the development can complement the existing built form and prove a positive addition to the village. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cobbold. Within time. Members, questions to the applicant? I see no questions to the applicant. Thank you, Mr. Cobbold.
Thank you very much.
Members, questions to the officers? Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Chair. This is almost like trivial, but I guess it's relevant. Has any work been done assessing visibility displays on the road, Western Road?
If I can draw your attention to condition number 14, so County Highways are happy with the access and they're recommending the sight lines of 2.4 by 43 metres are acceptable.
Okay. Councillor Goodison.
Yeah, right. Sorry. Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to ask the officer a short question. One of the objectors has written saying the council's own policy is that only full applications in conservation areas will be considered. How do we marry that with the fact that this is not a full application?
Okay, as I said in the introduction, I think the agent said as well, it's not a legal requirement that it has to be a full application. On page 51 of the officer's report, it actually deals with that. If we think we have enough information to consider the proposal as an outline stage, then we can carry on and determine the application. And in this instance, we have enough information to do that.
Alert, alert. You have a message from the dark side.
Thank you.
Alert, alert.
Like I said, I get messages from offline, so have to bear with me on that one. And that was a message from one of the officers. Any other questions for the officers? Councillor Tomlin, followed by Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Well, it's on this same point of normally we would expect to look at a full application in this instance, and my question really to the officer is the judgment here about such an application. It would probably have highlighted that we were expecting sufficient objections to it having to come to DC, and I find slightly a great difficulty in seeing that here we are looking at only access and the principle, given the fact that we've got indicative layouts that no one's happy with, tree officers are worried about trees, so we have to rely on this going to reserve matters, and it just seems very unsatisfactory. I just think it's really why the judgment was made. Thank you.
Councillor Tomlin, what's the question?
It's really the justification of why we have in front of us just a simple outline, why we rely on this officer judgment that there was enough information, bearing in mind it's highly likely to be objections, it being in a conservation area, while we were not, I feel we're compromised in decisions. So the question is why.
If I can just explain, because we don't have that information, or because we have numerous objections to it, that isn't justification to then turn around and say it has to be a full application. All that's before us is the access. The access is considered safe by the highways officer. In terms of being able to fit a dwelling on the plot, we're satisfied that there is room on the plot for a dwelling. And at the moment, you don't know the size of the dwelling, the design, the height of it. Those are all matters for later on, which can be considered. The conservation officer is happy with that approach, and the tree officer, his only objections are to the siting of the dwelling, and that isn't for consideration at this stage. He raises no objection to the access point.
Councillor Tomlin?
Yeah, okay. I mean, I understand the situation. It's just, I suppose, registering disappointment, but thank you.
Councillor Robinson, followed by Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chair. It's partially been answered by the previous question. It's just to confirm that the position of the dwelling will be something that can be decided at reserved matters, bearing in mind the tree officer's objection. And the position at the moment isn't something we're going to be stuck with if we allow this outline.
And the question, Councillor Robinson?
Question is the position of the dwelling a matter for reserved matters? And we can sort that out later.
I can confirm that the positioning is reserved matters. It's only the access you're looking at the moment.
Councillor Potter?
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Tautology possibly, but just to confirm with Sue, I think she's said it already in a way, but I mean, if the reserve matters that they would subsequently consider as professional officers deviate such that a number of the things that are clearly outlined within the outline application could not be satisfied, I presume their professional judgment would lean heavily against that type of approval. I mean, we would have confidence, I think, in the compatibility really of the detail that would subsequently occur to what we have before us now. That would be the approach of the planning officers, presumably.
Yes, so at the reserve matters stage, we'd be looking at the scale of it, the positioning of it, the design of and appearance of the dwelling. If those aren't acceptable, then the reserve matters could be refused. The reserve matters should also be supported by an arboricultural impact assessment and a method statement as well. So we'll have all of that information then. And unless we're happy that the dwelling is of a size and location that will fit satisfactorily into the plot without having an adverse impact on the trees and equally an adverse impact on the conservation area in terms of its design, then that would be refused. That reserve matter would be refused. And obviously neighbouring properties would be able to comment on those details when they come in as a reserve matter.
That's fine, too. Thank you.
Just another sort of final sort of line on this one, Councillor Potter. We have known reserve matters be called into the committee. If it is considered that that's the correct venue for determining the application. That it has happened before. Any more questions to officers?
I mean, just to make the point there, I'm sure the local ward councillor would be on the ball on this as usual and make sure that did find its way to us.
I would trust they would, yes, quite agree. If there are no any questions to officers, debate. So I'm going to kick off, Councillor McCormick.
Button. Okay. Well, I see precious little reason why we can refuse this application. So I'm reasonably happy to move in that, having had a look at the drawing, having had a look at Google Maps as well, and seen the intended site, seen the matters under consideration, there's no potential issues with access. There's no potential issues with siting. There might be some concerns on trees and removal thereof, but my understanding is that would be something that we would need to see the reserved matters. So in principle, I think we should approve the development, and therefore I'm moving.
Thank you, Councillor McCormick. Do I have a seconder for the officer's recommendation? Councillor David Leake. Been moved and seconded for the officer's recommendation for approval. I'm going to run through everybody on the list. Councillor Court. Councillor Court. Unmute.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you
all
now.
My unmute buttons have disappeared off the screen. Approve.
Councillor Leeks. Still muted.
No, agreed. Sorry. Four.
Four. Four. Councillor Robertson.
Yeah, approve the recommendation.
Yeah.
And for Ann Court, if your mute button disappears off your screen, just touch the screen. It comes up in the top right corner.
There we go. Councillor Goodison.
Abstain. Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor George is not here. He's had technical problems. Councillor Frankham.
I'm approve.
Yeah, it's for the recommendation. Yep, got it.
Yeah.
Councillor Grant.
For the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor McCormack, who moved it, so I'm for. Thank you. Councillor Mike Bound.
For.
Councillor David Potter.
For.
Councillor Chris Tomlin.
For the recommendation. For the recommendation.
Thank you. Bernie.
I have 9 for the recommendation and 1 abstention.
The recommendation is approved. Officers.
Thank you, Chair, that the application is approved, subject to the conditions in the officer's report.
Thank you very much. Move on to item number 2. And item number 2 is the Country Garden Buildings in Turgis Green. And I believe we're going to say goodbye to Councillor Robinson for this one. And there's no speakers, so I would ask, Councillor George, you're back. You're muted, Councillor George.
Yeah.
You're muted, Councillor George.
My apologies. I'm afraid I've had a bit of an internet problem, so hopefully I've resolved it. But
okay.
Can't continue with this particular item, I guess.
We are on item number 2, just starting now. Officers, if you'd like to introduce the application.
This is planning application full planning application at Country Garden Buildings, Turgis Green, Hampshire. It's for the erection of 5 numbered BA office cabins and a change of use of existing storage building from sui generis to a B8 storage use, including revised access parking arrangements and associated works. It's part retrospective. There is no update, but the planning application was amended during the life of the planning application to remove, there was a takeaway unit proposed at the start, and that was removed from the consideration on the 11th of March 2020.
Thank you very much. Some of the text in the application still refers to this takeaway van, so we can ignore that as it was withdrawn. And I go straight to questions to officers from the committee. Any questions to officers? Councillor Michael Bound.
Thank you, Chair. Could the officer, just for the purposes of the video, define sui generis, please?
A sui generis use in planning means that it doesn't fall into one of the use classes orders, such as B1, B2, B3, A1, A2, A3. So it means that it has no permitted development rights. It doesn't comfortably sit in any one of the listed uses for planning, and it's just a term that refers to uses that fall outside of other uses. So in effect, it's just a use on its own that doesn't fall into a retail use or an office use or an industrial use or a storage use. And so it can't change its use from anything to anything. So it's just a term that's used as it's not defined.
Thank you.
Councillor McCoy, did you want to speak?
Yeah, just a brief one, really. What's the anticipated increase in number of vehicles using the A33 as a result of this application going ahead?
I'll just have a look on the file for you. There was no, there was no objection from Hampshire Highways. They accepted that there was an already existing use on the site, and I'll just see their comments if you bear with me a moment. Sorry, I'm just finding the original ones because the second ones were the comments. They just said that the change of use will not generate significantly different levels of traffic relative to the former use, and I therefore confirm that the Highway Authority have no objections to this change. So they obviously evaluated it to be of a similar, because there was already an existing use on the site, a similar impact on the highway.
Okay, it doesn't sound like they've spent a lot of time on that, but that is those of us that know that location will know it's on an extremely treacherous bend on the A33 with a junction, with a garage, with a Londish shop, with Nick Robinson's motorcycle shop tucked round the back. And the current site, not that that should be of any interest to us and he's recused himself, the current use of the exact site appears to be Log Cabins for Sale UK, which I would imagine is a very low volume addition to the considerable traffic that's already using that junction. If we're anticipating similar low levels, then I can't see how we can object to it. But I'm really concerned if there was any predicted increase in traffic, I would be seriously concerned.
Sorry, yeah. Well, I'd say the county were consulted on it. The site is selling cabins, but then instead of them being empty cabins, they're offering them out to people to use as offices. I suppose, as at the moment, instead of working from home, you could rent the office. So people who want to buy a cabin can come and see what a cabin looks like, how it feels, how it can be set up, and then the people who are renting the space inside can use it for their their computer and a workspace. That's why there has been no highway objection to it.
Okay, and this is the grey area then, because potentially we could have people using each cabin as an office during the day. I presume they wouldn't use them to live in, but if there are daytime usages, then there might be, I don't know, say there's half a dozen offices on there, that might generate quite a significant amount of traffic. But we don't have anything to, I don't really expect an answer to this supplemental because I don't think we've got enough information to go on.
Yeah, the application form is saying that there's currently 3 employees on the site and that they expect 11 employees maximum to be on the site. There's no chance of anyone living in them. There's an hours of use restriction, and we've put that on as a condition, and we've also put a suggested condition on page
Yes, I read that.
Page 73 of the main papers, condition 5, because B1A is one of the use classes that has permitted developments to change into other uses. So we considered it appropriate to remove all permitted development rights. So if any of the cabins wanted to change, then they would need planning permission.
Councillor Bound?
Thank you, Chair. It's along the same lines. On page 64, maybe 4 paragraphs up, it is intended that the cabins will be used as show buildings for the products sold from the sales offices. However, they will also be used as micro offices to avoid buildings standing empty. If all the buildings are being used as offices except the sales building, what's the sales building for?
That would be for the people to sell the cabins from. It would be the office for the business on the site for selling cabins. I suppose it's a bit like a sales office as the show home is the sales office, and then you can go and visit the show homes.
It says that the cabins will be used as show buildings for the products sold from the sales offices. I'm a bit confused there, because if all the cabins are being used as offices, what's the purpose? What would then be the purpose of the other building, which appears not to have a use? And it would seem to me could be then used for something else.
The use of the site would be as to sell a product, which is the cabins, and one of the cabins would be used as the sales office. So if you wanted to purchase a cabin, you would come onto the site, go to the sales office, talk to the employee, but then you could also see examples of the offices, not the examples of the product they were selling in real life, as opposed to just seeing on a magazine or a brochure the size of the cabins that were for sale. So instead of having those cabins empty, the applicant has asked, could they be used for a B1A use as micro offices?
Come back to the phrase, the cabins would be used as show buildings for the products sold from the sales office.
Yeah.
Yeah, the sales office is selling the cabins, but you wouldn't buy the cabin that's on the site. You would order one that would come to your house. They wouldn't keep moving the cabins off. They would you would purchase one and it would be delivered to your home. But you could then go and see and feel and get one.
Okay, I'm obviously, I'm too thick to understand this. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Potter.
Again, thank you, Chair. Again, on the same issue, obviously, we all know this area, those of us who travel the A33 reasonably regularly. Looking at page 71 and the second paragraph down, those of you who've got it in front of you, but the point that is made there, it is considered there would be little harm to highway safety to warrant a reason for refusal of the proposal. I mean, that's our own planning officer's commentary. I guess they're based on all of the information we have, including the observations of the highways officer. I just wondered really, because it is a view expressed, really what's that actually based on in terms of vehicle movements, possible movements in the new arrangements that are going to apply to this site, because it is fairly straightforward. It's to say there's little harm to highway safety, but I mean, obviously on the point Councillor McCormick makes, were it to be increased significantly, I guess there is a view that might be the opposite of that, saying it could well cause a hazard in that particular area. I just wondered how that comment had been built up and expressed in that way, if you're able to help.
Are you talking about the officer comment in relation to the Hampshire highways? I mean, I can read you verbatim what Hampshire Highways said, which was, sorry, they sent two, one for the, I'm just checking the dates of them.
I think it's our own officer's observation, isn't it, if you like, as a summary view based on their knowledge of the application and the highway officer's comments thus far.
Yeah, I mean, the county are the highway authority, and they've been very clear. They've confirmed that they have no objection to the change of use, and then the case officer has taken that with the proposed use and has made the conclusion that they don't warrant a reason for refusal on highway grounds.
Okay, I'm probably just saying what everybody else is saying. There's limited information, isn't there, really, regarding, you know, the way this is now going to be used under the new arrangements, and we expressed some concern about that because of the particular highway, dangers that can occur in that area. But okay, thank you.
Excuse me, but Mike Townsend, you want to speak?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was just to come in and hopefully help the committee with this one, because I appreciate it is a slightly unusual position. It is a well-known spot on the A33. I pass it every day myself. I think that the slight oddity here, if you like, is that there's potentially two types of ways in which the site would be used, which I think is causing some confusion. So just picking up on Councillor Bound's point first, the proposal is that the sales building would remain as the sales building throughout. I think the difference would be that on the occasions where they can occupy what would otherwise be show buildings to be seen, they will be occupied as office space. On the times when they're not occupied, they would just be viewed as people potentially buying them. So I guess anyone coming to site would either see an occupied office building or an unoccupied office building. Either way, they have the ability to come and see it on site physically. So the sales building maintains that position. I think with regards to the way that the Hampshire Highways will have looked at this, will have been the same way that we have to, which is that the existing uses and the planning history leads that there is a activity associated with the site, and that given that it is I would suggest quite a constrained site in terms of its volume, etc. There are some almost self-limiting points around this in terms of the number of parking spaces and actually realistically how many people will be able to access and use the site at any one time, which I think will have all been factors in certainly Hampshire's view on the application, which is why they've described it in that way, and in our own reporting of it. So I think to a degree, it is a case that I think it'd be quite challenging to put a specific number on the use. It's not the same as, for example, where you have tricks data associated with a B1 office use on a typical business park. So I think it is one of those situations where a judgment has to be made, and we can simply go with the Hampshire Highways advice on this occasion, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. Councillor Tomlin.
Press the wrong button, sorry. It actually has slightly been answered, my question by Mike. It was just to clarify that we've got 4 little offices, 1 sales office, and I'm just trying to remember, did we say 11 employees or we said 8 employees, something like that, and there are 6 parking spaces? Well, this is a sales office, so one would consider there would be visitors, and also there's a storage unit, so I'm not sure of the use of the storage unit. So my question now, again, okay, the highways have said what they've said, but are we adequate parking, or are we going to now be sanctioning a little bit of on-site traffic chaos? And given that this is a petrol station on a bend, I mean, where do we have what's the word, reassurance that this won't get to a situation as I described?
Well, I suppose we can give you the guarantee or the reassurance, but what we can say is that we've looked at the parking requirements for the amount of floor space provided, and 6 were required, and that's been provided. I can't really give you any other assurances, though, like as Mike said, it is self-limiting the site because of its size and access. You can't spill out onto the A33. You can't park there. If you can't park there, you won't go there, I suppose, is the summary.
Thank you, Patricia. Mike?
And yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to supplement that, I think the other aspect of it will be that the application forms and the expression of 11 people will no doubt be the maximum. So I suppose that will be at the points of maximum occupation of all of the office units, sort of permanently 4 offices. I think that's, yes, it can be permitted by this application, but I suppose the reality of whether that would actually happen in real terms, I think would need to be factored in. So again, I think it just comes back to that sort of relatively self-limiting element.
Okay, any more questions to officers? Debate? Who'd like to kick off on this one? Councillor Potter.
Not a complicated debate, Chair. In fact, I mean, I think having heard what I've heard and looking at the reasons are set out in the officer's report, you know, there are good material reasons for the approval of this application. And I think on balance, I mean, the observations of the highways officer and the advice we get from our officers is sound, and therefore I support the recommendation for approval, Chair. I'm happy to propose it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Potter. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bounds, thank you. It's been properly moved and seconded for approval. And if I could run down the list of members: for, against, or abstain. Councillor Court.
For.
Councillor Leeks.
For.
Councillor Rod, and Councillor Rollins is not here. Councillor Goodison.
For.
Councillor George.
I'm afraid because I lipped out again, I think, during this particular debate for a few seconds, by the look of it, I think I'd have to abstain.
Abstain, thank you. Councillor Frankham.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Grant.
For.
Thank you. Councillor McCormack.
Against.
Against. Councillor Bound. For. Councillor Potter. For. And Councillor Tomlin.
For the recommendation.
Thank you. Bernie.
I had 7 for, 1 against and 1 abstain.
I've got 8. I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 for. Bernie?
Sorry. I got 7, but I'm not sure if I heard Councillor Bound properly.
I heard you 4.
Councillor Bound 4.
That would make it 8 if I didn't hear him. Sorry.
Thank you very much. The recommendation is approved. Officers?
I can confirm that the application is approved as per the written papers.
Move to item number 3. There are no speakers, no update, and I would ask Sue Tarbutt to introduce the application, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for a single-storey front extension and a first and two-storey side extension. The application is before you because the applicant is a member of the council employee. On the plans, you'll see that the extension on the floor plans is shown as a hatched area, so it's clear on there. If we go on to the next plan, so it's the hatched area on there to the front of the garage and the porch, and also to the side there's a bedroom proposed. The site already has planning permission for exactly the same extension, albeit with a hipped roof. The proposals before you today are for a gable end roof, and the officer's recommendation is for approval. So it's the area above the flat roof garage that you can see on the photograph in front of you.
Fine. Is that it? That's it, Sue, is it?
So yes, and the officer's recommendation is for approval.
Right. Fine. Thank you very much. Members, questions to officers. Councillor Robinson, and welcome back.
Thank you, Chair. Just really on this, do we know what the reason for the change is? Because it strikes me it doesn't make any difference to the accommodation. So why are we recommending having something there which is out of keeping with the street scene? Because just looking at the photos, all the others are the same. why are we changing to something that makes no internal difference to the development?
Basically, they gain extra storage actually within the roof space, so they've shown that as storage. The previous approved application started off as a full gable proposal, which the officers asked for it to be amended to a hip roof, which was subsequently approved. Since then, though, under permitted development rights, they've changed the property into a gable end building, a dwelling, with a loft conversion and a dormer around the rear. So the gable end already now exists. And in that context, we feel as officers that we would now be able to recommend refusal for this one there. So it's matching what's already there. And there are a mixture of roofs in the area.
Okay, Councillor McCormick.
So it looks like this has a loft con. Did the loft con go in before this application as part of a different application?
Right, so the loft conversion was done after the last approval, which I think was in 2018, November 2018. So after the approval, they then, on permitted development rights, did the loft conversion and changed it to a gable end. And then this current application came in, which is just to do the side extension again and to have a gable end roof as opposed to a hipped roof.
Okay.
Okay. Any more questions to officers? Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Well, no, just please, could we just, for me anyway, clarify how much of this is permitted development and how much isn't? On the basis you're saying the gable end was permitted, moving it again, is this not permitted, or is it, which part of it is permitted and which part is not permitted, if you see what I mean? Thank you.
What's before you requires planning permission. It was just the loft conversion, and how they did it was permitted development.
Is that clear, Councillor Tomlin?
No, sorry, perhaps I wasn't clear. What I want to know is the very fact now they're putting a side extension on, which would appear to require, in their request, a gable end moved further over than the existing gable end. Then is any of what we're seeing on the side extension permitted development, given they've already done quite a lot of permitted development on this particular building?
No, what's before you needs permission. It's not permitted development.
Okay, yeah. Anyone else? No. Debate? Councillor Robinson, followed by Councillor Licks.
I'm not keen on this at all. Looking at the photographs, the other half of this semi is hipped and the house to the right of it is hipped. And I think to spoil the street scene to gain a bit of storage is not correct. If it was to actually gain habitable space, it would be a different kettle of fish. But just to gain storage, I don't think there's the justification there. But as Councillor Bound always says, I would like to hear other people's opinion.
Councillor Leeks, followed by Councillor Tomlin.
Sorry, I think he's just answered the question or asked the question in debate about the street scene.
That was your point as well? Yes, okay. Councillor Tomlin.
Sorry, I don't want to be accused of repetition, but I fully support with what Nick has just said about street scene and bulk in appearance, you know, of this gable end. Okay.
I'm going to ask a clarification from Sue on this particular issue. So I understand that the permitted development produced a gable end. They were allowed to do it under permitted development. Is that the case?
That's correct. As part of the loft conversion, you'll also see, I think on some of the photos, you can see a flat roof dormer to the rear as well. As part of that loft conversion, the existing roof was allowed to change under permitted development from a gable to a hip. I mean, sorry, from a hip to a gable end.
So the fact that they detracted from the street scene becomes a little bit immaterial on this, as they could have done it anyway under permitted development.
Well, exactly. That's what they have already done. There is now a gable end to the property. Originally, it was hit, and they were able to do that onto permitted development. That's the reason why we're now saying that, because that is now an existing situation, it has already changed the street scene, and that this really would be no different.
Thank you. I hope that helped, because I was getting a little, I had a little misunderstanding there, but I think that's cleared it up. But do you want to carry on anything else on that one, Councillor Tomlin?
No, Chair, thank you.
Okay. Anything else for debate? Councillor McCormack.
So I can understand where objectors are coming from on this, because if you look at the totality, and there's at least two different phases of development here, it is quite a substantial increase in the original size of the property. But the majority of it has been allowed under permitted development. So the loft conversion and the gable end, and there are probably other houses not that far away that have had similar things done to them. That would probably of itself be the chief sort of basis of an objection. What we're considering appears to be some additional extensions, a glorified front porch and not much else. If my understanding of that's correct, then I would move the recommendation, because I don't think we've got any material grounds to refuse it.
Okay. Do I take that as you're moving for the recommendation?
I will move, unless somebody says that I've completely misunderstood it. I think I will move it.
Fair enough. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Potter?
Can I just say something as well, Chair, or not?
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
I think the important things are that, clearly, I mean, in my view, this wouldn't be anywhere near the DC committee if it wasn't for the ownership of the property, if I'm frank with you, because, well, just because. And in terms of permitted development, I mean, the move from the hip to the gable has occurred in any case. I mean, I know there's all these references to the street scene. I mean, I know Port Edgar, right? I used to live in Pakenham Road. I mean, I defy anybody to be coherent in their description of the street scene there, quite frankly, with the variations and extensions that have occurred over a period of those types of houses, understandably, really, in the way they are extended. And I don't find this objectionable at all. There's been one letter of objection. I don't think it's had widespread criticism from neighbours around. Why would it? Most of them have got changes and extensions of their properties anyway, really, over the time, and I understand that. So I have no hesitation in supporting the officer's recommendation. I'd be happy to second Councillor McCormack's proposal and say no more on it, Chair, quite frankly.
Thank you for that. Properly moved and seconded for approval. I'll run through the list. Councillor Court.
Approve.
4. Councillor Leeks.
4.
Councillor Robinson.
Yeah, I thought the consultation was run, but was that run?
Councillor Goodison.
4.
Councillor George.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Frankham.
For.
Councillor Grant.
4.
Councillor McCormack.
4.
Councillor Bound.
4.
Councillor Potter.
4.
And Councillor Tomlin.
Just to be different, against the recommendation.
Fine. Bernie.
I have 10 for and 1 against.
Thank you very much. That is approved. Officers.
Thank you, Chair, that the application is approved, subject to the conditions in the officer's report.
Thank you very much. And agenda item number 4, land adjacent to Newnham Lodge.
This is a full planning application for the erection of a single dwelling on land adjacent to Newnham Lodge, Tinley Lane in Newnham. There is an update on page 6 of your update papers. The update is from a number of objectors saying that they've read the report and it has addressed a number of their concerns, but their key concern remains alterations whilst the application is being built, and minor amendments that are agreed or retrospectively agreed, and that they'd like the planning committee to confirm that no subsequent changes or deviations from the plans during the building phase will be sanctioned, and that retrospective planning permission wouldn't be possible. And the officer has commented on that comment, and it's not possible to provide the assurances that the public representation is seeking to remove the opportunity for future amendments to the scheme to be submitted. We're required to consider any proposed changes to the original permission on its merits, and it would be unreasonable and contrary to the tests of applying planning conditions to remove this right to seek retrospective approval or for any minor alterations.
Can I ask something as a sort of supplementary to that? Is that, notwithstanding what you said, could we impose and I'm sorry, I may have missed it in the conditions, have we withdrawn permitted development rights?
Permitted development rights haven't been removed. That's because in the officer's opinion, this is a large house on a large plot, and permitted development would have to have a reason for being removed, and it feels that the plot isn't tightly packed in with other houses, and that the applicants should enjoy their permitted development rights to put extensions or outbuildings as and when they felt they needed to.
Fine. Thank you very much. I just wanted to cover that particular point. Right, questions to officers. There are no speakers to this application. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. On page 119, the block plan, there's a building marked as existing single garage and outbuilding. What property does that relate to? Because it appears, according to the plan, to sit in isolation and not be part of any other property. I'm just a little bit confused about where that belongs.
Yeah, the red line for this application excludes that building. The red line for the previous application excluded that building. It's never been part of the consideration for a dwelling on this site. At the moment, it is just a garage. I think it was in association with Newnham Lodge, but there's no blue land on this application to say who own, whether the applicants own the adjoining land. So at the moment, it is just a land that was under the previous planning permission that was granted a couple of years ago, was just separated from the neighbouring property, and that's an existing building, and it was segregated off.
Any more questions? No. Oh, Councillor George.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Chair. Looking at, there's some suggestions here about the property being different in scale and what have you to the original application and what have you. Could you confirm, is the building, it's difficult from these plans to show exactly what's happening, but is it different in terms of square footage, layout and what have you, or volume? Is it a much larger building, or is it just much the same with a little bridge between the garage and the house itself?
If you look at page 119 of your papers, or if they could be shown, the block plan, there's a very light sketch of grey of the existing footprint of the building that's been approved. But in summary, the previous building was a large dwelling with sort of low eaves and dormers and a detached garage. This is a building on a similar footprint. It's got an attached garage, but that attachment has been set back and reduced, so it's not close to the front of the property. And it's remained as dormers on the front, but the rear of the property, the eaves has been lifted to provide 2 stories at the back of the property. What's being shown now, you can see to the left where there's the grey on the left-hand side boundary, you can see the outline of the previous house that's then through, and the outline of the garage. So it's slightly narrower on the plot, but it is a bigger building because they've gone for full height 2-story at the back as opposed to rooms in the roof. And the garage is linked to the house as opposed to being freestanding, but it did have a close boarded fence between the house and the garage in the previous approved plan. So although the building was detached, it was linked with a fence.
Thank you. Any more questions to officers? No? Debate? Councillor Leeks.
I'm happy to move the approval, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And a seconder? Councillor Robinson. It's been properly moved and seconded for approval. And I will run down the list again. Councillor Court.
Approve. 4.
Councillor Leeks.
Approve.
Councillor Robinson.
Approve.
It's 4, please, folks. 4 against. Thank you. Councillor Goodison.
4.
Councillor George.
4.
Councillor Frankham.
I had to leave the room, so I will have to abstain.
You'll abstain. Councillor McCormack.
4.
Councillor Bound.
4.
Councillor Potter.
4.
And Councillor Tomlin.
Against the recommendation.
Thank you. Brenny.
7, 8, 9, 10. Councillor Miller, I don't know, did you vote, Councillor Grant? Councillor Grant hasn't voted yet.
I beg your pardon. I called out a name. No?
4.
4. Thank you. Oh, all right. I had her down. Anyway, I must have misheard that. But thank you very much for checking, Bernie. And apologies, Councillor Grant.
I've got 9 for, 1 against and 1 abstention.
That's absolutely correct. That application is approved. Officers?
To confirm that the application is approved, subject to the conditions listed in the officer's report.
Thank you very much. Move on to item number 5. And Mr. Cobbold, you're back again.
I'm still here.
Thank you. And if you'd just like to stand by, we'll just get the application introduced by the officers.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for the demolition of an existing stable building and the replacement with a 2-bedroom bungalow. The site is located outside the settlement policy boundary, and a public right-of-way, number 20, runs to the east of the site. As I said, the proposed bungalow would be 2 bedrooms, would have an attached garage stroke store, and a maximum height of 7.5 metres. The officer's recommendation is for approval.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cobbold, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'm the planning consultant speaking in favour of the application. Another well-written report which sets out clearly why planning permission should be granted for the proposed dwelling. I'll just clarify one thing to start with. The bungalow, excluding the garage, has a footprint of 132 square metres rather than the 62 square metres quoted in the committee report. In terms of the application itself, it's a pleasant site right on the edge of the current built-up area. It's occupied at the moment by stables, and therefore, as confirmed by your committee report, it qualifies as previously developed land. This is the route to the approval here through the allowance to develop previously developed land in sustainable locations in accordance with SS6 of the local plan. The applicant's also been in discussions with the owner of the neighbouring property who would like to buy the plot to enable their parents to move from Tadley to the new house to be closer to them. So there's a local need specific there to it. The proposal for a small 2-bed bungalow, the size and type, which I've heard this planning committee in the past say that they got a massive need for in rural locations, and where there's an increasing pressure to increase the size of dwellings rather than maintain the smaller housing stock, so it's a smaller dwelling in the countryside. Just to address a few of the questions and issues raised by the parish council and the objectors, there are a few misunderstandings and inaccuracies. First of all, the parish council and some third parties object on the basis of the loss of green land. I'll ignore the suggestions of green belt in there because that's, as you know, irrelevant. Green land isn't a planning definition, and as previously stated, the site is previously developed land. It's occupied by the stable building that will be replaced by the dwelling, and therefore the suggestion of green land, whatever it means, is incorrect. The other consistent objection is the highway's impact. To be honest, the impact of one dwelling on the highway, taking on average one vehicle movement every few hours during the course of the day, is not grounds for refusing permission, especially as the current equestrian use can generate vehicle trips of a similar number as well. Obviously, there's no objection, as you'll see, from the local highway authority. The plot's consistent in size with plots on the northern side of New Road, and the dwelling, if anything, is smaller than the other dwellings in this location, which I put to you as a benefit rather than a negative, as I said before. Therefore, suggestions of overdevelopment fail to consider the character of the area properly. The established building line is retained. Drainage of the site has been considered by an independent drainage engineer who's content that the proposal will not lead to any flooding issues downstream or away from the site. And in terms of the access and footpath, which you'll have seen have been raised, the plans clearly retain access to the rest of the field to the rear. The red line is drawn as it is because we have to include the site access into the application, not because we're changing that access or any impact on the footpath itself. So I'll complete this by saying what I said earlier. So there's a massive need for housing in Basingstoke and Dean and Hampshire, and suggestions of dwellings remaining on the market in this case, which we've heard about in the objections, that suggests poor pricing rather than a lack of need. Whilst it's only a single dwelling, I have no doubt it will nonetheless help address housing need in the area. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Well in time. Questions to the applicant? I see none. Mr. Cobble, thank you very much indeed. Thanks for coming along.
Cheers.
Questions to officers? Councillor Bound,
Thank you,
followed by
Chair.
Councillor Robinson and Councillor Tomlin.
Page 130 of the report, under sustainable development, it mentions the settlement will be accessible by means other than private car, namely a bus route. However, this service is limited. Now, I'm presuming the bus service they're talking about is the one that runs from Tadley to Basingstoke on the A340. That is not a limited service. There's about, David will correct me on this, but 4 or 5 buses an hour on that route.
Is that so, Councillor Leeks?
There's 5 an hour going to Tadley to Basingstoke. I wondered if he meant the other end of that road, which is the 14, I think it is, which is limited.
Thank you for the clarification. Sue?
I bow to the councillor's knowledge of bus services because I don't know them in that area. I think the officer was probably referring to the one that Councillor Leeks referred to, the less limited one, but I acknowledge there is a more frequent service down the A33 from Tadley down to Basingstoke, which could be walkable, yes.
Councillor Rawlinson?
Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
But, thank you, Chair. If this is approved, can we put a restriction on it that no roof rooms should be put in? Because I'm just looking at the size of the roof and the height of the roof that's proposed on this. And I think we will be looking at dormers and roof rooms within 12 months of it being built. And we won't have a 2-bedroom bungalow, we'll have a 5-bedroom house. So if it's approved, I would like to see all permitted development rights removed to stop it being turned into something that we're not actually looking at the moment. Can we do that?
Yes, if you're of the opinion that you want to remove permitted development rights, you can. If it's if you're concerned about alterations to the roof, then we can just specify that. If you're concerned about possible extensions to the property and the plot isn't big enough, then equally you can refer to those elements. But we can definitely restrict any roof alterations.
But if it comes to that stage and we need to comment on conditions, we can certainly do that. Fine. Councillor Tomlin?
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question on the highways, their comment. Hampshire County Council seem obviously concerned the public access right of way, that it should be made, well, firstly, there needs to be an agreement before they would support it. And I guess that would be therefore a condition. And also they are specifying 6 metre structuring surface stuff. I'm not reading anywhere whether they're for or against any modifications, because they normally talk about sight lines on the road. There's nothing of that in the report. So can I be assumed that they are happy once permission is given that it actually meets highway standards in terms of access to the highway? I can't read anything about it. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the highways officer has raised no objections. It's just in terms of the rights of way officer has made some comments, and those are covered in various conditions. And also there's one in terms of hard standing as well that will cover the bound material. That's condition number 5. But there's no objections from highways.
Yeah, and I noticed there's an informative number 4 on the rights of way as well. Right. And Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. Just there's some of the objectors have pointed out there's an issue here of connection to the formal sewer system and what have you. And I noticed that in the informative here that the applicant should enter into a formal agreement with Thames Water. Given some of the issues we're having, if that wasn't possible, can I be assured that they would have to come back to the planning committee to look at alternative ways of dealing with that sewage effluent if they weren't able to come to an agreement?
Yeah, if they weren't able to come to an agreement with Thames Water in terms of their foul drainage, then they could look at alternatives. And depending on where it's located within the site, depends on whether it'll actually need permission and the size and capacity of it. So it may come in as an application if it needs permission. If not, it could be something that they could do under permitted development.
Is that okay, Councillor George?
Thank you on that. Could I just be clarified what would be considered to be permitted development under these circumstances and what wouldn't actually? What would require planning permission? You say where it's on the site, etc., but could you just clarify that position a little bit more, please?
I'd have to get my permitted development order out if you just bear with.
Yes, Mike.
Yeah, I think again, I entirely understand why Councillor George is asking the question, because it's to try and I suppose safeguard a position just in case this wasn't possible. So I understand that. I think it's always difficult though to kind of cover all scenarios in this way. In that, yeah, the eventual drainage solution, if the connection wasn't possible, could be any manner of things, and there could be all multitudes of kind of variances in terms of whether it's in front of the building, how much it's above or below ground, etc., etc. So I think there's all sorts of things that'd be quite difficult to provide a definitive position on in that way. I think the key thing is that if it's something that requires permission, then it would come back as a planning application before the LPA.
Thank you, Mike. Sue?
I can give you some more details. So, for example, if they happen to use a septic tank, if it's forward of the building line, the principal elevation of the building, then that would need permission. There's also a capacity size in terms of 3,500 litres. So it depends on, like I said, the size of the facility that they might put in, but also where it is in. So if it's to the rear of the property, then it's unlikely that it would need permission. But if it's in forward of the main elevation of the house, then it would need permission there, and then that would come in as an application doesn't automatically come to committee, would only come to committee, for example, if it was called in or the number of objections.
Okay, fine. No more questions to officers. Debate. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Clarify the situation on the buses. The number 14 would certainly serve that area. It's one every hour, first thing in the morning and late in the afternoon. The rest of the day, it's one every 2 hours. The number 1, which I believe is the one that runs from Tadley to Basingstoke, is frequent, but it will be a fairer walk, bearing in mind that this is being put forward as a retirement home. So I'm not entirely happy about the bus situation on it. Other than that, I can't see any valid reason for refusing it. It is previously developed land, but as I said before, I am really concerned that we're looking at something that will be very, very shortly extended, and I would like to see all permitted development rights removed if this goes forward. Thank you.
Councillor Leeks.
It would be the number 2 bus. We don't have a number 1 now. And from where it's situated, I think it would be nearer to go to walk to the number 2 bus than the number 13, 14. I get
14.
And the number 14 bus. So I would think it's nearer to walk to the number 2 bus than the other one.
Okay. Anyone else for debate? Nobody else will go for debate. I'll move from the chair for approval. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Robinson. And I will go through on the vote.
Thank you, Chair. I am happy to second it, subject to the removal of permitted development rights.
At the end of the vote, if that is the will of the committee, we will certainly address that, which is what I said, I think, earlier on. When we get to conditions with the officers, that's exactly what we'll say. We'll take the vote first. And Councillor Court.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Leeks.
For.
Councillor Robinson. You're muted, Councillor Robinson. Can't hear a word you're saying.
Thank you, Chair. I can't vote until I know what the situation is on the permitted development rights, because that will change my vote one way or the other. I need to know that before I can vote.
Anne?
Councillor Robinson's correct. You know, members need to be able to know what it is they're voting on, and removal of permitted development rights is relevant to that. So we need to know whether that's part of the proposal. So whoever moved it needs to confirm that they want permitted development rights removed, and the seconder should also confirm, and then you should put the item to the committee.
Fine, exactly. I moved it, so I would confirm that moving the recommendation is on the condition, or on the proviso, that permitted development rights would be removed from this application should it be approved. And the seconder?
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to second it on that basis.
Thank you very much. I'll restart the vote then on that basis. Councillor Court?
For the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Leeks?
For.
Councillor Robinson?
For.
Councillor Goodison?
For.
Councillor George?
For.
Councillor Frankham?
For.
Councillor Grant?
For.
Thank you. Haven't forgotten you. Councillor McCormick?
For.
Councillor Bound?
For.
Councillor Polster?
For.
Councillor Tomlin?
For the recommendation.
Thank you. Bernie?
I have 11 for the recommendation. Unless you're voting, Councillor Miller.
I'm voting. I've moved it. I will vote for. Yes,
That's
it's 11.
12.
That's 12 for the recommendation. It's approved, officers, with this proviso.
Thank you, Chair. So the application is approved, subject to the removal of all permitted development rights. So bearing in mind the concern was in terms of the size of what the building could end up with, I would just confirm it would be for Class A, which is extensions to the building, Class B and C, which relate to roof alterations. And if you're concerned about overdevelopment of the site, then Class E would be outbuildings and other structures within the garden. So if you could confirm that, if I can ask for confirmation of that. I've got a thumbs up from Councillor Robinson, so that would be.
And a thumbs up for me as well. And do we need to do any more on that, A through E?
Chair, no, as long as the committee's all happy with that, I think we could take it as read.
As read, okay. And unless anybody's got any comment to that, it's removal of A through E on the permitted development rights. Right, thank you very much. That is approved, and we now move on to agenda item number 6. And this is where Mike comes in. And this is the quarterly appeals report.
Thank you, Chair. I won't spend too long on this. It was just to obviously report the quarterly appeals report. You'll note from the dates of some of the decisions that we're playing a little bit of catch up in terms of the cancelled meetings. So this is sort of catching up on that basis. Two key points really to raise. One in terms of general appeal performance. You'll note I think there's 13 appeals listed there, of which only 2 have been allowed. So that's good in terms of the overall performance of the LPA collectively, both committee and delegated decisions. The only case I was going to bring to the members' attention was that set out Appendix A on page 154 of the agenda. Members may recall this was a site that came before committee, a site at Glebe Close in Dummer. The sort of slight peculiarity in this situation was that earlier in 2019, we refused a planning application at this site under delegated authority for a single principal reason for refusal. That application was then appealed. Subsequent to that appeal coming in, you'll recall that the committee considered a second similar application, adding both the original principal reason for refusal and impact on heritage assets as an additional reason for refusal. So in the end, what we had to do was to effectively alert the planning inspector that a subsequent decision had been made that was therefore material to the overall consideration of the appeal. And the inspector eventually came forward with a position which agreed with those additional heritage asset impacts. So it's just a reminder, I suppose, that the inspector is open to look at all aspects of the appeal and come to their own conclusion on that, whether it is entirely in accordance with the reasons for refusal or whether it's looking at it at additional points as well. Inspectors can effectively look at things afresh. That's all I had to say, Chair.
Thank you, Mike, very much. Unless anyone's got any questions or comments to make on the appeals report. No, I then bring this committee to a conclusion. Thank you very much, everybody, officers and members. And we can now, I think,